Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from in the world. My name is Tony Showala. My pronouns are she and her, and I am joined today by two of my amazing colleagues, Claire Byrne, our Senior Community Manager, and Alexa Clay, the Director of RSA US, also joined today by our speaker, David J. On behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for taking the time today to join us for this conversation, this month's US Salon titled Relational Work in a Loneliness Crisis. Before we get started, we'd like to give you a little bit of background on the RSA, RSA US, and talk about some best practices that we are always aspiring to embody when we facilitate these events. Founded in the UK, we are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufacturers, and Commerce and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. Today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organization. We are committed to a world that's resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative, where everyone can fulfill their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas platforms, and unique global network of 31,000 change makers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. Of our 31,000 fellows spread out around the globe, we have about 1,200 folks living here in the United States. RSA US exists to coordinate fellowship activities in the US with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. So with that, let's talk about how we aspire to show up and support one another in these events. As I mentioned, this event is being recorded, so please feel free to adjust your name if you want to accordingly. A few things I would just want to call out from this slide are just being intentional and aware of the language that we're using, making sure that it's language that celebrates people's humanities. Creating space for all voices. So that might mean stepping back. That might mean emboldening yourself and sharing your experience and where you're coming from. Considering the impact of the things that you're saying, being aware of how something you say may land with other folks that are involved in this space, and then connecting with each other authentically. We encourage you to be present, engage in the chat, turn your camera on if you want to, keep it off if that works better for you, whatever's authentic for you in this space. And then also in the things that you say and in the way that you hold yourself. We just encourage you to be who you are, and we're really excited to share this time and space with you. If you do have any questions throughout the event, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me. I'm at the RSA US events account, and then my colleague Claire, as I mentioned earlier, is also on this event as well to provide some support. A few other logistic things. I put David's image up there as well as his book just to get you acclimated to his work a bit. Any of the resources that we share in the chat during today's session will be shared in a follow-up email that you'll receive after this event. That post-event email will also include a link to the event recording on our YouTube page. If you do have questions throughout today's event, we encourage you to put them in the chat. There will be some opportunities for you to engage a little bit today. So if you do want to come on camera, you're welcome to do so. But again, you're very much in choice, and we want you to be comfortable in this space. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Alexa, to get us started.
Thanks so much, Tony. Welcome, everyone. I want to take a moment to introduce our speaker today. David J. is a community organizer with a background in physics, born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. From founding the Asexual Visibility and Education Network to working in the heart of the tech reform movement, David has centered the work of building relationship as a tool for healing and driving change. His research and writing centers on the reasons why these important relational tools so often go underappreciated and underfunded, and how that reality might change. David is regularly invited to speak at conferences and universities on topics ranging from asexuality to movement organizing, to tech reform, to queer family structure. David lives with his 2 co-parents and 2 children in Oakland, California. Today, David will be talking to us about the value of relational work, and I just finished reading your book, so congratulations on getting this out there. This is something that personally, myself and also our team has been really excited to be in conversation with you. We're all natural community builders. We've been pushing out a new program around social connection. And so much of the struggle that you talk about in terms of how we sell this work in, how we get institutional and funder buy-in around the importance of relational design, relational wealth is really core to our work. In holding up the fellowship, we have around 1,100 fellows in the US and 31,000 fellows around the world. We're constantly thinking about how do we get folks to lean into the experience of being part of this community of change makers beyond transactionalism. And what does that look like to have a network that really supports relational flourishing? So I think we're also holding space in this conversation to lean in to what's next for our community. But I want to start, and I think the entry point into your book, you have such a personal story for leaning into the work of relational wealth, and wondering if you can talk a little bit about your own personal experience that drew you to this topic, and also why you think this is relevant now. It feels like so much of the world is waking up to the power of relational work. What has allowed this historical moment to exist?
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I've been an admirer of the work of the RSA for some time, and so beautiful to be in this room. So beautiful to see so many faces I know and so many faces that I'm excited to learn. Hope to know more of who are in the audience here. Yes, David J. He him pronouns. I really this work started for me. When I was in high school, coming to terms with my own identity as an asexual person. And like a lot of asexual people, I was told that the relationships that I formed didn't really matter. And so I was told that I was destined to be alone forever because my relationships didn't fit the definition of what relationships were supposed to be. And I knew that that's not what I wanted. I knew that like pretty much everyone had a really deep need for connection with other people, connection with myself, connection with the more than human world. And I was on a quest to sort of figure out, okay, how do I build that? And a really powerful moment in that for me was finding other people who identified as asexual. When I was 18, I started this website that brought ace people together. Ace is sort of a slang umbrella term for people on the asexual spectrum. And uh, as we came together, I got to see how not only was the relationship that I was really craving happening, not only were we connecting with one another powerfully, but that relationship led to collective care. It led to a resilience in our community, and it also led to collective action. It also led to collective power. So the fact that we were coming together, connecting and caring for one another meant that when there was an opportunity for us to lobby the American Psychiatric Association to get delisted as a mental disorder, even though we sort of there wound up being some pharma companies who were spending a bunch of money to try to have that not happen, we could mobilized really, really powerfully because of the relationships we had. And that link between connection, collective care, and collective power has really been what's motivated me throughout my life. And I've seen time and time again, as someone building movements, as someone witnessing and supporting movements, how profound and impactful, how profound and systemically impactful that that combination of connection, care, and power can be. Um, and so I'm really deeply motivated to help make more of that happen in the world. And what I also noticed was that even though this work of inviting people into relationship was, in my experience, immensely effective and immensely powerful at creating the kinds of systemic change that I wanted to see, that many other people, including people with a lot of money, wanted to see. Uh, the relational strategies for building that tended to sort of become invisible when it became time to fund them.
Mm.
There was a way that when I was in a room where people were connecting, uh, those connections felt incredibly powerful. But when it came time to sort of present that strategy to a funder, or even talk about intentionally pursuing an institutional setting, it
Mm.
sort of returned to vapor. And so for the past 10 years, I've really been trying to research why that is.
Mm.
Why is it that we're not supporting people? many of whom, like you all in this room, who are doing work that's really, really needed, work that's more needed than ever now that we're facing a global loneliness crisis. We need to be inviting people into relationship. But our institutions are failing to recognize and resource the work it takes to do that. They're failing to recognize and resource the people. Like I imagine many of you all in this room who do that work. And that's, I think, one of the big things that's holding us back. Not only around loneliness, but around the health of our democracies, around our capacity to respond to the climate crisis. And so that's some of what I'm going to talk about today is why does that disconnect exist? And what can we do to bridge it? Uh, but before I do, I'm curious for a quick show of hands, and feel free to raise your hands if you're, a super technical person. You can use the raise hand button on the bottom. You can also put in chat if that's intimidating. How many people here resonate with that experience of relational invisibility? How many of you all can think of a time when there was really powerful relational work that just wasn't seen? So see, um, Claire, Lo, Mary, Molly, Amy, Lena, thank you so much. Gabby, yeah, I see hands, I see your hands going up. Um, uh, I'm curious. I'll give just a minute. If you could put in chat a if you're in a position to put in chat a 1 or 2 sentence story of what was that experience? What was the moment of that relational visibility? What was not being seen?
David, as people are typing, I just wanted to share for us, I think it's often about having to translate opportunities into a highly rationalistic framework for, anytime we want to gather folks, we need a theory of change. We need
Hmm.
outcome metrics. And so we have to do so much work to pre-engineer why does something make strategic sense versus defaulting to gut intuition, knowing that people have a longing to connect, knowing that, things could be accelerated if we could start to create more connective tissue within a field. So there's so much translation work.
I completely agree, and I'm seeing some of these. Um, uh, I don't know if I'll be able to, but clear on the amount of time and energy not being valued, and I think part of that is that the early, like, nascent relationships we don't know how to see. Um, uh, the real need during COVID, how much that was emphasized, and I think how much institutions weren't ready for it. Lo, I think everything you're saying around conferences, I feel such a sense of heartbreak at so many conferences I go to because they are designed to be relational, they benefit from being relational, and they're often structured as anything but. Um, uh, and and Mandy, thank you for uh, sharing your experience as a non-binary person. I think as a queer person, as an ace person, I also see this relational invisibility as deeply caught up in caught up not only in heteronormativity but in patriarchy and white supremacy, um, and and then I also really echo, I think, Danielle, what you're saying about fear is really important. Um, and I'll get to that in a second, but I think one of the things that defines relational work is that it is unpredictable, and or not, or rather not predictable in the way that other kinds of work are predictable. And understanding how to embrace that intrinsic unpredictability and how to know when the work we're doing is predictable in a different way is really, really key to how we make the case for relational work, and also how we talk about it with ourselves, with our funders, with our communities. Thank you so much for everyone who is sharing. Uh, and so I want to um, I want to dive into this question of why this disconnect exists. Um, I want to define a kind of opposing ideas of a relational and transactional way of thinking. So transactional thinking is how most modern institutions operate. I think I associate it more strongly with corporate institutions, and then I think it is sort of expanded as a management practice to many, many other places, to government, to nonprofits. And transactional thinking says, I'm going to put resources in, and I'm going to understand ahead of time exactly what I'm getting out of it. Right? I'm going to the store, I'm putting some money on the counter, I'm getting a gallon of milk. And so when we think transactionally, we want predictability, we want control. Uh, if I'm investing in a factory, I want to know exactly what the factory is going to make, and I want to know exactly how much money I'm going to get back, exactly what the ROI is. And so success looks like predictability. I'm going to put a bunch of measures and controls in place. I'm going to put a bunch of controls in place to make sure the factory does exactly the thing I want it to do. I'm going to put a bunch of measures in place that essentially say, tell me if this factory is doing exactly the things I predicted it would do. And so there's a way of thinking about control and a way of thinking about measurement that come from that kind of transactional thinking that are effective some of the time, that are disastrous when we try to think about relationship. And so in opposition to that sort of transactional factory way of thinking, I want to say that there's a relational way of thinking. And this relational way of thinking is about um, creating spaces where we learn to change one another in new, emergent, and unexpected ways. So if I think about if I want to have a great conversation, I may be able to accurately predict how to have that great conversation. I may be able to say, oh, there's a friend I haven't connected with for a really long time. I'm going to go out of my way. Maybe I'm going to fly across the country to spend time with that friend. I know where we're going to spend time. I know what food we're going to be eating. I know what, maybe we want to go on a walk in nature. Maybe we want to dance. Maybe we want to do other things that are sort of going to deepen that relational experience. I can know a lot about how to create the conditions for a really powerful moment of connection. But the better, more effective I am at creating those conditions, the less I know about what the outcome is. I can't tell you what we're going to talk about. I can't tell you, especially like how might our lives change for the better because we've connected, but I know that they are going to change for the better, and I'm willing to put in time, money, and other resources to make that change happen. That ability to know that we're creating the conditions for relationship that have positive, values aligned, but unforeseen outcomes is core to how we understand relational work. Um, and uh, and these two ways of thinking, the transactional and the relational, they sort of operate in entirely different domains of physics. The ability that we can predict how to create good conversations, how to create a dinner party where people will connect, is a really immensely powerful ability of the human brain. Uh, and um, and I'm curious for you all, uh, and one way to think about this, and then I'll come back to a question, is that there's many different ways to define a relationship, and I I found a definition that I find particularly interesting and powerful for my work, which is that a relationship exists when we change one another. The more we change one another, the more deeply we change one another, the more that change persists over time, the more powerful the relationship is. And so when I think about inviting relationship into the world, I'm often thinking about how to create specific environments where another person and I, or many people and I, learn to change one another. That is an intrinsically vulnerable thing to do, to change and be changed. But if we can create the right kinds of spaces, then we can we can do that shared learning. And I really emphasize this, uh, the idea of space. Um, I've come to believe through my work that uh, relationship really how we build relationship through placemaking. We build relationship through creating environmental conditions. So if we want to bring people together, it's all about how we create the right kind of environment to invite them into, where their connection will happen. And so I'm curious for you all, and if you have experience of that kind of highly relational place. I know when I've been in places that are highly relational, when I've been in places where connection is happening, I'm learning to change and be changed in new ways. New parts of myself are sort of being brought into being. I feel it. I feel on a very visceral, embodied level that deep relationality. Um, I'm curious for you all, and I'll open up to chat. Are there places that you have experienced, places that come to mind that are deeply relational? Coffee shop?
David, for us, I think as the RSA, we had our origins in coffee houses, and I
Mm,
think there's a reason for that, right?
yeah.
I think that kind of we talk about the spirit of informality as being really a key ingredient to the relational container that we've designed. I think for a lot of my work, when I first started working with Fortune 500 companies and trying to work with impact entrepreneurs within those companies, people that were trying to transform the culture of these organizations to deliver social and environmental returns. It was really important to get these folks out of bureaucratic contexts and out of cubicles and into informal spaces. And so I think part of the energy of that movement was created by taking people out of huge organizational places and into informal kitchens, into just spaces where folks could connect at a more authentic level.
Yeah, I very much agree. And I love the emphasis on artist run spaces. Molly, I'm so inspired by your work at Five Oaks. Um, uh, it's and I also Gabby, naming farms, land projects. I've been in such powerful relational spaces there, and I think um, places where we can be in relationship with a more than human world uh, intersect really beautifully in how we are in relationship with one another. And so I think we have a sense of these spaces, and I think many of us in this room have a really deep wisdom about how to create these spaces, how to find them, how to co-create them, how to invite others into them. And that wisdom is built on top of some very powerful relational lineages. You talk about the coffee shop. People have been gathering in coffee shops for generations and generations and generations. People have been gathering and drinking tea. Like uh, there is a really deep, evolved wisdom about how to be in relationship in that kind of space with that kind of beverage, with those sorts of dispersed tables that people can wander between, with that sort of informality. And so we often are taking these lineages about how to be in relationship that we've experienced, that our ancestors have refined, and then we're building on them, we're evolving them to a present moment. And if we do that, if we say, okay, here's a really rich lineage that has been helping people connect for a long time, whether that is faith-based, land-based, food-based, music and dance-based, we're going to take this lineage and then we're going to evolve it and tweak it for this moment. That is often a really powerful way to create this context relationship, to predict that a powerful thing will happen, even if we don't know exactly what it will be. Um, and the thing that has always felt um, uh, that I think has been motivating me for several years, is that if we have that knowledge, if we have that wisdom, if we say, okay, I know how to create a place where relationship will happen, or better yet, I know how to create an ecology of places. Maybe there's a big event, maybe around that there's small, less frequent events, maybe there's a bunch of one-on-one conversations. I'm going to pull all of those places together to create a really powerful relational outcome. Why can't I go to a funder and put that strategy on the table and say, here's the places I'm creating, here's the lineages they're rooted in. Here's all of the evidence that goes into my knowledge that this strategy will invite people into relationship. Why can't that funder then say, oh, I see the same prediction that you see. I also see that this strategy for creating place will be effective at creating relationship. I'm willing to bet on it with you. And as we bet on it, this is what we will see this is how we will know if those relationships are forming. This is how we will know if those relationships are successful. Because often when in my research, what I've found is that the hesitation to invest in relational strategy comes down to an inability to understand what success looks like. Back to that metaphor of the factory, funders want to know exactly what is going to happen with their money. They want to be able to say transactionally, exactly this thing will happen. And someone was talking about funder fear earlier. They want to be able to say, to know that unexpected things that are misaligned with their values won't happen. And when we come to them with relational strategies, I think they sort of get caught up in, oh, I don't know, because I don't know what's going to happen, because this is intrinsically a little bit unpredictable, it's scary. And just as importantly, I don't know how to justify it to my board. I don't know how to justify it to the other members of my family. I don't know how to justify it to whatever other people I'm accountable to in how I choose to deploy philanthropic resources or taxpayer resources or anyone else. So in a second, I want to get into what does that impact reporting look like? If we've got this strategy on the table, how do we talk about the data that's going to prove that it's successful, even if we can't know exactly what's going to happen? But I'll pause there in case there's any Alexa, any feedback or questions that you had. I don't want to go too far.
No, David, I think that would be great to begin to think about, yeah, how we sell this to institutions. What are the ways in which, because so much of this is experiential. But for folks that are, yeah, that are making important pitches around social change initiatives, how do you suggest they work with funders to help socialize this mindset? Like, I think oftentimes it's one meeting that you have the
Yeah.
ability to influence. It's not like you're on this journey where we're like, okay, we're trying to get from transactional mindsets to relational mindsets. So what are some sort of hacks to even ready funders for that conversation?
I think that is a really fantastic question. That's part of why I'm hoping this book that I've written can be a tool, because it really breaks down why the kind of predictability that we expect from many investments does not work at sort of at a fundamental mathematical level. If you have a system where things are changing one another, the more effective you are at that process of evolution that helps them learn how to do that, the less predictable your system becomes. So there's a fundamental tension between predictability and relationality. And I think being able to, and a lot of the work that I'm doing, especially on this book launch, is trying to go and educate funders, trying to be in conversation with funders about that and how we hold that. And just as importantly, what we can know about relational space, even if we can't know the exact outcome. So, for example, in my experience in social movements, values really, really matter in relational space. If I take a bunch of open source software developers and bring them into relationship, then I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I can bet there's a good chance there'll be some open source software coming out of it. But there might be a new genre of hip hop. There might be like some beautiful acts of collective care. There probably will not be a lot of patent litigation because that is directly opposed to the values of the community. So if I understand that I'm gathering people on a particular set of values, a particular struggle, and then I can, and I know that the community is going to be in integrity with those values, then I can know with a certain degree of certainty that there's certain kinds of things that are more likely to happen and certain kinds of things that are less likely to happen. And I think that can help to ease ease discomfort of people outside of the community who are investing in it, to say this is unpredictable, but it's going to land in this range. Um, and uh, and I want to come back to that idea of a strategy, a map that's sort of laid out on the table. And the map is a plan for the relational containers that will be created. Here's the spaces we'll be creating. Here's the lineages those spaces come from. Here's how those spaces are going to be recognizable and comfortable to people in the community that we're working with. Here's how people might flow through those spaces to be exposed to one another enough that they can engage in the deep work of forming relationship. And then what's going to happen if we're successful is that we'll start seeing values aligned but unpredictable behavior coming out of these spaces. We'll start seeing things happen that are unpredictable. They're on some level anecdotes, but we can be really efficient at collecting stories about what's happening as people connect and using them internally to understand where we as an organization be showing up and using the predictive funder to share with funders. So there's a set of principles I think about for collecting these stories that come out of relational space. It sort of follows the arc of how relationships might develop over time. And those principles are gathering, care, action, and conflict. And the idea is, if I'm bringing people together, one of the first things I'm looking for is people deciding of their own accord to spend time together. This could look like people who meet through my gathering are getting coffee together. It could look like I gather people, and then afterward there's an after space. There's sort of a place with food and drinks that people can stay or leave if they want to, and they're staying and they're connecting with one another in that space. I'm observing that people are choosing to spend time with other folks in the community, and I'm maybe getting a little bit of narrative, a little bit of story about how that time is spent. I've done some really effective experiments sending out emails or text messages right at the end of an event, asking someone if they plan to have a follow-up conversation with anyone they've met, that have given a really interesting sort of high-level measure of, okay, what is that short degree of relationality. The next level, if say there's a series of events, people are getting to know one another more, is that I'm really interested in acts of collective care. So are people showing up in one another's lives in a way that's meaningfully supportive? That could look like making an email introduction to a potential job. That could look like in a sort of more advanced, like showing up and helping with childcare, or dropping a meal off at someone's house because they're sick or they're going through something challenging. Understanding where those acts of collective care are happening are not only a benefit into themselves. So many people who are interested in investing in relationship are interested in it because they see the impact on human health. They see the impact on things like hospital stay times. People who don't have communities to care for them spend more time in hospitals. And if we can measure collective care emerging in a community, then we can know that we're starting to see some of that benefit of community resilience. Disaster resilience is tied to this sort of collective care. Care, as I saw in the ACE community growing up, is also a powerful precursor to power. So where people are showing up to support one another, there is the capacity for them to be taking action together. Where people are showing up to support one another, if someone starts to innovate, if they come up with a new idea, that idea is going to be supported by the community around it in a way that makes it much more likely to succeed. And so that gets us from care to the next uh, item that I'm measuring, which is action. Are people inventing and executing actions that are aligned with the community's values? In social movement, that may look like different forms of social action for systemic change. In a fan community, that may look like collaborative, incredible cosplay, or it may look like a band forming, right? That action in a scientific community, especially if we're talking about building relationships across disciplines, because that's where the richest scientific research happens. It might look like new research projects, new interdisciplinary research projects. But if we see the sort of precursors of gathering and care, then we can know where to focus on inviting more people to take action together. And that's often where the most powerful impact is. If what I care about is climate change, if is fighting climate change, if what I care about is in is investing in an artistic community, that action layer is where the impact that I'm looking for is going to happen. But I might not be able to see it right away. I might see gathering and care first, and then get to these stories of action. And then the last piece, which is subtle but really powerful, and I have some gratitude for folks like, I know Lena's here from Search for Common Ground, for the peace builders who have been educating me this, is conflict. So all communities need to engage in conflict. A community that is not engaging in conflict is brittle compared to a community that is engaging in generative conflict. So if communities have a way to, if a conflict inevitably emerges in communities, when we pay attention to how that conflict is playing out, it tells us a lot about the resilience of a community. It also tells us a lot about how that community is living their values. If there is a community that has a value of nonviolent civil disobedience, and a conflict emerges in the community about how to live that value of nonviolence, we will learn a lot about how the community is holding that value by seeing how the conflict plays out. This is tricky, right? It's tricky for a funder to get to see these sorts of things. So I've been very interested in looking at ways that are consentful and respectful, can that can show that conflict is happening in a generative way that is aligned with a community's values. So if you think about these from sort of the level of people first gathering to the level of them sort of engaging in complex actions together and like working through messy conflicts together, you can generate quantitative data about this. You can say how many people from this event are spending time together, how many people from this community report some act of collective care. But because the results are unpredictable, there's always going to be a necessary qualitative layer. Instead of data that sort of flows into a KPI graph that says, here's how many acts of collective care we've had, this quarter, this month, and we want it to go up. You really need to zoom in and see what are those acts of care. Each act of care is going to be really different in scope and scale and impact. And so instead of a graph, I think of relational reporting looking more like a heat map that says, hey, we invested in all these strategies. Here's where in our community, here's around where in our strategic landscape we're seeing relational indicators, and we're going to zoom in and see the stories there to understand. We're going to have to zoom in to see the stories to understand what's going on. And so I want to switch us to questions in just a second, but before I do, I want to invite you all to imagine. This is something I myself have been struggling to imagine. What might the world look like if we can make this change happen? What might the world look like if we learn to resource the work of building relationship? What might the world look like if in our schools, in our communities, in our political campaigns, and in our democracy, there is this flowering of places for meaningful connection? It's not just that, though this is enough in and of itself, it's not just that we're in a loneliness crisis. That I would say is because many people live in a desert of places to connect. If those places exist, they don't know how to find them, they don't know how to access them, they don't feel safe accessing them. What happens if those people are invited into healthy places to connect? What happens if those people, as they're connecting, learn to care for one another? What does that do to our healthcare system? What does that do to our education system? Where people are caring for one another and supporting one another in the process of learning. What does that do economically? We've seen that the formation, especially of cross-class relationships, is one of the most powerful indicators of predictors of economic growth. Um, uh, I would also say, what does that do to our work lives? If we're no longer sort of trapped in a particular job, often in a particular corporation that's a very limited relational landscape, but we feel this ability to form relationships, to take a career in whatever values aligned place we want to take it. What does that do to our democracies? There's some powerful evidence that shows that social isolation and as closely is a driver of a rise in authoritarianism. Hannah Arendt said that totalitarianism is institutionalized loneliness. It comes out of loneliness and it reinforces the conditions for loneliness in order to maintain its power. What happens to democracies around the world if all of these people who are lonely are suddenly brought into places where they're caring for one another and building power together? So I think I'm in a place of struggling to imagine that world, but feeling very, very pulled to help to create it. And with that, I think I'm about it. The time I was going to take to talk. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to move to questions and other conversation, and then Alex, also curious for any feedback. I think I might have not given you as much room to ask questions as I initially hoped, but I hope we covered the important things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. I think this is fantastic. I want to turn over and see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to put your questions in the chat or also come on camera if you aren't already. Raise your hand and we can bring you into the conversation. Yes, Lena.
Hi, David. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. I haven't read the book yet, so I'm probably grasping at threads, right? It's still coming. It hasn't arrived here in Belgium yet. But, two things. One is that as a change maker, it's become more and more clear that it's not just the information that makes people become champions of a vision for change, but it's the relationship that enables them to feel that this is helping me self-realize, this is meeting my need, I feel understood, thus I want to bring this change to others. And I feel like this is even more true in a world where shared truths are no longer, where facts won't change minds, and where it's trust that will override that, right? That's through trust that we will begin to come to what we consider truths, right? So that all feels like a reinforcement of what you're articulating. But there's another little voice in my head which says, if you look sort of back in history, and we used to call like the old boys club or the men's club, like in fact, they were running the seats of power in the boardrooms also on relationality and were not necessarily penetrable to facts or other viewpoints. So it can also create a kind of enclosure because trust feels so good. And when you don't feel as though anything can harm you because those relationships are solid. So it can engender like a negative kind of loyalty, which maybe your book also addresses, So I just wanted to share some of those reflections.
That is a beautiful reflection, and I can share something that comes up with Lena. Also, so deeply admire your work at Social Common Ground. I was a really key moment in this journey for me was I was looking at all these nonprofits that had seemed to operate as if the way they made change in the world is they got information to people. They sent them emails, they sent them text messages, they sent them on social media. So if you went to their website and they were like, "Do you want to be part of our movement to make change? Follow us on Instagram." and like receive our broadcasts. And I was like, at a deep level, I said, no, we need to be inviting people, not broadcasting at them. We need to be inviting them into spaces where they connect. That is what's going to be powerful. That's what's going to make change happen in the world. And I sort of was spent, I'd say, a beautiful and in hindsight naive part of my life being like, I am just on the side of inviting people into relationship. And then someone sent me an article about ISIS and white supremacist groups. And they were doing exactly the playbook that I'd been telling everyone to do. They were finding the people who are in the audience. They were having an individual reach out to them, to mentor them, to have a deeply relational one-on-one conversation. They were inviting them to these closed spaces where they could connect. They were also doing deeply toxic things like getting them to engage in behaviors that caused them to believe the rest of their community wouldn't support them, and to believe the only people who would ever support them were the people in the hate group. But they were engaging in really effective relational strategies, and it was working, but just working in a direction that was abhorrent to my values. And so I think that similar to your point about the old boys club, yes, they were very relational. What are the values that those clubs were running on? What are the values that those relational networks were running on? And whenever we see people building relationship, that question of what values they're building them around, I think is really key for us to understand whether or not we want to show up in movement with them, whether or not we want to show up to support them, because not all relationship is going to lead to a place that we want to see.
Amazing. Thank you, Lena, for really bringing light to the shadow there in terms of how this relationship work can take us in directions that maybe aren't always so good. I want to open up and see if anyone else has any questions. And also just share, David, I think what's so inspiring for me about your work is the different levels that this hits. So, we've talked a lot about movement building, about community building for social change. And for me, this is totally part of my day job. But then it's also, if you have concerns about like democracy or, as a mother of twins, like where are the places that I can go to find community? I think what's been powerful about your work is how it activates so many different parts of my existence and how I think about relationship in all the facets of my life. And it's not just a sort of societal change dimension, but it's also interpersonal. It's kind of how we are together on a basic level. I know we spend a lot of time thinking about, rather than the value proposition of community, what is the feeling proposition? Like what are we offering energetically?
I'll respond to that just in case there's other folks who are thinking about questions, just to say, like, I think it's beautiful to hear you say that. And this has been such an important part of my journey, is that realizing that the process by which I wanted to build power in the world, and the process by which I met some very vulnerable needs, my own very vulnerable needs for connection with other people, my own desire to form a family when I didn't have a script that told me how to form a family. I'm now co-parenting two kids with two aromantic partners, and what's been a really, really beautiful experience for the past 8 years. And but I think recognizing how much we need relationship, and more that we need agency over our relationship. We need to know that we can invite relationship in when we need it. We need to know that we can evolve relationship to a new form when it needs to evolve. We need to know that we can release it when it's not serving us anymore. And if we have that agency, then it not only is, I think, has felt like a superpower in my life, right? Like there's so many paths to joy. There's so many paths to resilience when I know that agency is there. But that agency also builds, gives me a clarity on how to approach these bigger questions around climate, around democracy, that are really motivating.
Brilliant. I want to see if anyone else wants to come in or have any final thoughts. I know our team too also is thinking about this constantly, and even just it's provided motivation to think about all the invisible forms of labor that we do around this type of work.
Yeah.
and who often, yeah, gets pulled into doing the relationship work where that's not necessarily part of their day job. I know some folks are really interested in this idea of like how we have a chief network officer at work, but really that not being one person. Like, how do we all show up to do some of the relational work that needs to be done and recognize that as such an important part of the output? I know, Claire, you said your head is swimming with questions. Do you have one that's like, or Daniel?
Um, I'm just kind of I'm thinking through all of the so much like David. I just want to like go chat with you for hours about all of this, but
Hey, I'd love to.
but I'm mostly just thinking about communities of care and like boundaries and protecting ourselves in
Yeah.
place, like as community builders, as generative leaders or relationship focused individuals. How do we create space for others to show up and care for ourselves in those spaces? And I'm very interested in communities of care in my area of work, and making sure that people feel safe in those spaces, feel seen, witnessed, all of that. And I'm just curious as to your journey, your like how you've evolved or what you've learned on that journey with your relationship building and holding space for other people. So it's a lot to unpack, and maybe it's a bit of a heavy question just as we wrap up. But I'd love to know what you have, if you have any reflections on that.
Um, Certainly. Well, one, I'd recommend looking at the work of the Modern Family Institute,
Hmm.
which researches all the different ways that families show up, but is very focused on helping people have access to communities of care, helping people build communities of care. Um, and I think in my personal journey, there has been really, um, a really important role of intentionality. As an asexual and romantic person, there was a really my life really changed when I learned how to go on a walk with someone and talk about how we spent time together. What is the unique role that our relationship plays in each of our lives? And being able to talk about that, being able to talk about our relationship as a relationship, being able to talk about the on a concrete way, the ways that we were supporting one another and showing up for one another was really helpful because it let us iterate on that. It let us say, here's the things we're doing that are really powerful. We want to try doing more. Here's the things that we might want to try doing differently, or things that we're not doing, but we might want to like lightly experiment with doing. And uh, what my experience in care communities is that ability to come back to a place of talking about what's working and what isn't working, for both people is really, really critical, because it is easy for care to become a source of power. It's easy for care to become caught up in obligation. It's easy for care to become invisible. And I think all of those things can create an environment for toxicity, potentially for resentment, in ways that can be really harmful. And so I think a lot about the importance and the role of intentionality. And I also look to, and um, I'm still learning from this, look to disability justice movements as a source of really deep wisdom about the navigating the messiness of collective care. Um, Thinking about books like Care Work, and uh, the writing of people like Mia Mingus on access intimacy. I think they have some really deep wisdom about uh, both why care is necessary and why it's messy and how to navigate that messiness.
Thank you.
Amazing. David, just want to thank you and encourage everyone who hasn't yet read your book to read your book. It's phenomenal, and there's so many helpful tidbits. Even the glossary, I found myself hunkering down on. Curse of transactionality, in case anyone needs to know what that is. Gathering layer, relational agency, relational lineage. I think I even would love to do a workshop with folks to figure out how are we sourcing our different relational lineages? Where do our instincts around this come from? I think that would be a powerful exercise to do with our team. But really appreciate you stepping into this conversation. It is a wormhole. So I feel like the more that we're in this conversation, the more connections we see. And I think this is just going to take us some time to digest, but something we'd really like to have more offerings to our community to be more intentional in terms of their relational practice. And so really excited to know you, to start applying the wisdom that you surfaced in your book, and then to think about ways in which we can better activate this in the world together. I'll hand over to Tony now, who's going to take us out, but just really appreciate your time. And we'll be coalescing resources that were shared today too in a follow-up email. So anyone, don't feel pressured to grab links right just now.
And if I know we're switching out, but if I can say one thing quickly, it also is an audiobook. So for those of you who maybe have time in cars but don't have time to sit down and read books, I have got to have the joy of reading it, and it's available wherever audiobooks are, including in a growing number of public libraries.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Alexa, for moderating. So many really inspiring, thoughtful. I love all the hearts. Yes, yes, absolutely. This event just felt so good. So just want to honor that and acknowledge that. But with that, we've come to the end of our event. Thank you for taking the time, for joining us, for the work you're doing, for coming into this space and hopefully leaving this space with some thoughts, some ideas, some things that you're pondering around this and working to integrate this into your work. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your journeys with us. We honor those. We thank you for those. If you would like to learn more about the RSA community, becoming a fellow, please feel free to check out our website. If you already are a fellow and you'd like to continue to engage in this conversation, please join us on Circle, the RSA's online community. And for those of you, as we mentioned, who registered via Eventbrite, you'll get an email following up with a recording of this event when it is available. Thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you for your hearts and your time and your passion. We are honored to share this space with you and wish you all the absolute